Book of Heaven, Volume 28, Part 1. JMJ. Fiat. In voluntate Dei. Deo gratias. February 22nd, 1930. One who lives in the divine will remains surrounded by the divine immutability. Death of good. Sacrifice of life in order to make it rise again. I am always prey to that divine fiat which knows how to conquer sweetly and strongly. With its sweetness, it draws me in an irresistible way. With its strength, it wins me, in such a way that it can do with me whatever it wants. Oh, holy will, since you conquer me, oh, please, let it be, so that with your own strength and sweetness, I may win you. And surrendering to my continuous supplications, come to reign upon earth. Form your sweet enchantment to the human will, and let everything on earth become divine will. So while I was thinking about the divine volition, my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior and making himself seen, told me, "My daughter, if you knew what it means to give oneself prey to my divine will, the soul remains surrounded by our immutability, and everything becomes immutable for her. Sanctity, light, grace, love. So she no longer feels the variability of the human ways, but the stability of the divine ways. Therefore, one who lives in my divine will can be called heavens, which are always fixed and stable at their place of honor, with all their stars. And if they revolve, since it is the whole of creation that revolves, they do not change place, nor do they mutate, but the heavens remain always immutable with all the stars. Such is the soul who lives in my divine will. She may go around, do various actions, but since she goes around within the motive power of my divine fiat, and in the wholeness of my will, she will always be heavens, and immutable in her goods, and in the prerogatives with which my supreme will has endowed her. On the other hand, one who lives outside of my divine fiat, without its motive power, can be called like those wandering stars which fall in the space, as if there were no fixed place for them. And they are forced, like wandering stars, to run headlong, as if they were lost, away from the vault of the heavens. Such is the soul who does not do and does not live in my divine will. She mutates at each occasion. She feels within herself such variability of mutation that she feels boredom in repeating a continued good. And if she makes any sparkling of light come out of herself, it is like the glittering of the wandering stars, which soon disappears. It can be said that this is the sign to know whether one lives of divine will, immutability in good, and changing at every little blow, if one lives of human will. After this I followed the acts of the divine fiat going around in the works of creation, in Eden, in the most notable points and people of the history of the world, to ask in the name of all for the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. And my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, by withdrawing from my divine will, man gave death to the goods which my divine volition would have made rise in him had it not been rejected. As he went out, so died the continuous act of the divine life in man, died the sanctity that always grows, the light that always arises, the beauty that never stops, always to embellish, the untiring love that never says enough, which always, always wants to give. More so since, by his rejecting my divine will, died the order, the air, the food that was to nourish him continuously. See, then, how many divine goods man caused to die within himself by withdrawing from my divine will. Now, wherever there has been the death of good, the sacrifice of life is required in order to make the destroyed good rise again. This is why, justly and wisely, whenever I wanted to renew the world and give a good to creatures, I have requested the sacrifice of life, as I asked of Abraham the sacrifice of sacrificing to me his only son, which indeed he carried out, and prevented by me, he stopped. And in that sacrifice, which cost Abraham more than his own life, the new generation rose again, in which the divine liberator and redeemer was to descend, who was to make the good which had died in the creature rise again. With the passing of time, I allowed the sacrifice and the great sorrow of Jacob for the death of his beloved son Joseph. And even though he did not die, it was for him as if he had died in reality. This was the new call that made the celestial liberator rise again in that sacrifice, whom it called to make the lost good rise again. Furthermore, I myself, by coming upon earth, wanted to die, but with the sacrifice of my death, I called for the rising again of many lives, and of the good which the creature had caused to die. And I wanted to rise again in order to confirm the life for that good, and the resurrection for the human family. What great crime it is to make good die! So much so that the sacrifice of other lives is required in order to make it rise again. Now, with all my redemption and the sacrifice of my death, since my divine will does not reign, not all good has risen again in the creature. My will is repressed, and cannot carry out the sanctity it wants. Good suffers from intermittency. Now it rises, now it dies, and my fiat remains with the continuous sorrow of not being able to make rise all the good it wants in the creature. And this is why I remained in the little host as sacrament. I departed for heaven, but I remained on earth in the midst of creatures, to be born, live, and die, though mystically, in order to make rise in them all the good which man rejected by withdrawing from my divine will. And united to my sacrifice, I asked for the sacrifice of your life, to make its kingdom rise again in the midst of the human generations. And from each tabernacle I am as though on the lookout to accomplish the complete work, redemption and fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven, content with sacrificing myself and dying in each host, in order to make the Son of my divine fiat, the new era, and its full triumph, rise again. Upon departing from the earth, I said, I go to heaven, and I remain on earth in the sacrament. I will content myself with waiting for centuries. I know it will cost me much. Unheard of outrages will not be lacking, maybe more than in my very passion. But I will arm myself with divine patience, and from the little host I will accomplish the complete work. I will make my will reign in the hearts, and will continue to remain in their midst, to enjoy the fruits of so many sacrifices I have been through. Therefore, together with me, be united to the sacrifice for a cause so holy, and for the just triumph, that my will may reign and dominate. Fiat. February 26, 1930. How it is necessary to desire a good. If a people is not formed for the divine will, it cannot have its kingdom. How one who lives in the fiat is master, while one who does his own will is servant. I was thinking about the great interest that my always lovable Jesus has in making his holy will known, and was saying to myself, he loves, he longs for, he wants his kingdom to come, and then he delays so much in making it arise in the midst of creatures. If he wanted to, he can do anything. Power he does not lack. In one moment he can overwhelm heaven and earth. Who can resist his power? No one. More so since, in Jesus, wanting and being able to are all the same. Why then is he still delaying? But while I was thinking of this, my sweet Jesus, moving and making himself heard in my interior, told me, my daughter, longing for, desiring, and wanting a good is to dispose oneself to receive it. And when one receives a good that has been greatly longed for, one loves it, appreciates it, keeps it safe, holds it as the welcome one and the bearer of the longed for good. Not only this, but this is another excess of our love. We make the creature long for the good that we want to give, because we want her to place something of her own, at least her sighs, her prayers, her will of wanting that good, so as to be able to say to her, see, you have deserved it, because on your part you have done what you could in order to obtain it, and we, with all our heart, give it to you, while it is all the effect of our goodness. And this is the reason why first we make known what we want to give to creatures. It can be said that we place ourselves in correspondence, sending our letters of notice. We dispatch our messengers, making them say what we want to give, and all this in order to dispose them, to make them long for the great gift we want to give. Did we not do the same for the kingdom of redemption? There were 4,000 years of waiting, and the closer the time would get, the more pressing were the notices, the more frequent the letters, and everything, in order to dispose them. So it is for the kingdom of my divine will. I delay because I want them to know this, to pray, to long for it to come to reign, to comprehend the great gift of it, so as to be able to say to them, "You have wanted it, you have deserved it, and my will is now coming to reign in your midst." By knowing it, praying it, longing for it, you have formed its chosen people, in which it might dominate and reign. Without a people, a kingdom cannot be formed, and this is the other reason for making known that my divine will wants to reign upon earth, that they may pray, they may long for it, they may dispose themselves to form its people, in whose midst it can descend and form its royal palace, its dwelling, its throne. Therefore do not be surprised, if, while you see so much interest on my part, wanting my will to reign, then you see that it delays. These are the dispositions of our unreachable wisdom, which disposes everything with order, and the delay serves to place its knowledges on the way, which will act as letters, as telegraphs, as telephone, as messengers, to form the people for my divine will. Therefore pray, and let your flight in it be continuous. After this I continued my round in the divine Fiat, and as I arrived at Eden, I paused, in thinking of the reciprocal love between God and Adam innocent, and how the divinity, finding no hindrance on the part of man, poured itself in torrents upon him, enraptured him to itself with its love, by sweet attractions, making him hear its voice, all tenderness, saying to him, "Son, I love you very much." And Adam, wounded and enraptured by the eternal love, repeated his refrain, "I love you, I love you." And flinging himself into the arms of his Creator, he would cling to him so tightly as to be unable to detach himself, as to the only love he knew, and living only to love him. But while my mind was wandering in this reciprocal love of God and of the creature, my sweet Jesus, all goodness, told me, "My daughter, what a sweet memory is the creation of man. He was happy, and we too felt the fruit of the happiness of our work. We felt such pleasure in loving him and in being loved back. Our divine will preserved him for us, fresh and beautiful, and carrying him in its arms of light, it let us contemplate how beautiful was the work created by us, our dear Son. And as our Son, we kept him in our house, amidst our endless goods, and as a consequence, as our Son, he acted as master. It would have been against the nature of our love, not letting the one whom we so much loved, and who so much loved us, act as master. In true love, there is no mine and yours, but everything is in common. And besides, letting him act as master caused no harm to us. On the contrary, it gladdened us. It made us smile. It amused us. It gave us the beautiful surprise of our own goods. And then how could he not be master if he possessed our divine will that lords over everything and dominates everything? In order not to make him master, we would have had to place our divine will in servitude, which could not be. Wherever it reigns, there are no servitudes, but everything is mastership. Therefore, for as long as man lived in our divine fiat, he knew no servitude. As he sinned, withdrawing from our divine volition, he lost the mastership and reduced himself to servitude. What a change! From son to servant. He lost the command over created things. He became the servant of everything. By withdrawing from our divine fiat, he felt shaken from his very foundations, and he felt his very person vacillating. He experienced what weakness is, and felt himself the servant of passions that made him feel ashamed of himself. And he reached the point of losing the dominion of himself. So strength, light, grace, peace were no longer in his power as before, but he had to beg for them with tears and prayers from his Creator. Do you see, then, what living in my divine will means? To be master. A servant is one who does his own will. And I, surprised by the speaking of Jesus, told him, "My love, for as much as it is consoling to hear you speak about your divine will, so it is sorrowful to hear about the evils of the human will." And Jesus added, "My daughter, if it is necessary to speak to you about my divine fiat, which will serve as invitation, attractions, voices, tender, sweet, and strong, to call everyone to live in the royal palace of my divine will, that they may no longer be servants, but masters, so it is necessary to speak to you of the evils of the human will. In fact, I will never take free willing away from man. Therefore it is necessary that in the kingdom of my divine will I have the mounting of guards, the noble sentries, which may keep the creatures on their guard, making known to them the great evil of the human will, so that they may stand at attention, and abhorring it, they may love the happiness and the mastership that my divine will gives them. Fiat. March 5th, 1930. How Jesus wants to see his fiat palpitating in the creature. How the living in it is the recall of all the acts into the divine unity. What unity means. I live always in the pain of the privation of my sweet Jesus. What a hard martyrdom! If it wasn't that his holy will has taken his place, making itself felt continuously, such that while giving me life, it keeps me always occupied and dissolved in it, I don't know how I would manage to live. But in spite of this, the many dear memories of Jesus, as I believed I would never lose sight of him, his sweet and repeated little visits, his many loving stratagems, his many surprises, such that it seemed to me that I was living more in heaven than on earth. The mere remembering this is like cruel wounds, which render my painful martyrdom more crude. Ah, Jesus, Jesus, how easily you put aside and forget the one who loves you, and whose martyrdom you form. And you yourself said many times that you loved me so much. Oh, Jesus, come back, for I can endure no more. But while my poor soul felt the fever, for it wanted Jesus, and raving, it uttered nonsense, my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior and clasping me in his arms, almost to put an end to my nonsense, told me, "My daughter, calm yourself, calm yourself. I am here. I have not put you aside, nor is the nature of my love capable of forgetting any one. On the contrary, I am within you to direct all your acts in my divine will, because I do not want any of your acts, even the slightest, not to be noble and divine, and not to have the seal of my divine fiat. I want to see it palpitating in all your acts. This is all my commitment, to form the first copy of the soul who must live in my divine will." Having said this, he became silent, and I continued my round in the divine fiat, wanting to gather everything that creatures have done, in order to enclose everything in the divine will. And my highest good, Jesus, added, "My daughter, the living in my will is the recall of all the acts of creatures into the unity of it. Everything has come out from within its unity, from our single act that gives life to all acts. Therefore it is our right, by justice, that everything return to us, to recognize where they have come from. To recognize where an act comes from, who it is that releases life for so many acts, in what way and how. is the most beautiful homage to our power and wisdom, which, with one single act, is life of all acts. And only one who lives in my fiat, embracing everything together with it, takes everything as though in her power, and enclosing everything in that will in which she lives, she rises into our unity in order to bring us everything, and give us the true homages of all the effects of our single act. This is why, then, going around in our divine will not only gathers everything, but communicates your act to all created things, in such a way that all the heavens assume the attitude of adorations together with your adorations, the sun of loving us together with your love, the wind of glorifying us together with you. In sum, all created things, feeling, in my will with which they are all invested, your act which you do in it, they all assume the attitude of loving us, of adoring us, of giving us glory and thanksgivings, in such a way that we feel that in our divine fiat the creature gives us the fullness of love, the totality of adoration, the complete glory. Therefore, continue your flight in my divine will, and do not occupy yourself with anything else, because in it you have much to do. So I remained thinking about the unity of the divine will, and my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, do you know what unity of divine will means? It means that from within this one will there is nothing beautiful, good, and holy that does not come from within it. This one divine will of ours, one is its unity, one is its act. But while it is one, the will, the unity, and the act extend everywhere. And because it extends everywhere, as though in one single breath, it does everything. It embraces everything and gives life to everything. So one who lives in our divine volition fuses herself in our unity, and everything she does not go out of us, but remains inside of us. On the other hand, with one who lives outside of it, we feel the pain of the tearing she causes with her acts from within our will. And while she tears them away, she does not return them to us, because our divine will is not one with hers. Hence the great difference of one who lives outside of our fiat. All of her acts are divided and broken, not fused together. Therefore she will not have the good of feeling within herself the fullness of the light, of the happiness, and of all goods. But everything will be misery, weakness, and scarceness of light. Fiat. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 28, Part 1. Fiat.